Verse 1 of chapter 23 of Genesis jumps many years past the end of chapter 22, most likely a couple of decades. What happened in Abraham's family and among his growing clan during that time, we don't know because the years are just skipped over in the record. But here's what was happening in the wider world at that time. It's the middle of what's known as the Bronze Age. The first of the Minoans are settling on the island of Crete, and their influence will profoundly affect the Mediterranean basin over the next 1,000 years, especially in Greece and Asia Minor. Stonehenge is being completed in England. The 11th dynasty of Egypt is being supplanted by the 12th. And the Sumerians, the first civilization to form in the Mesopotamian basin, started a couple of millennium before, is now moving towards its demise as others in the area are rising up to rival them. The first glass is being produced. Both writing and measurements are starting to be standardized across vast regions. Now, that's all interesting stuff, but what we really want to know is what was going on in Abraham's extensive clan as Isaac grew into a man. Well, we read in verse 1, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Since Sarah was 90 when Isaac was born, he's 37 now. Sarah is the only woman in the Bible whose age is given at death. Verse 2, and so Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. That parenthetical remark that Hebron was earlier called Kirjath Arba was most certainly added by a later scribe once the name of the location was changed by Israel from its earlier Canaanite name of Kirjath Arba, which was where Abraham's clan had settled for a season as they made their rounds of available pasture for their extensive flocks and herds. We read on, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. While Abraham was off leading their flocks to pasture somewhere else, Sarah, who was in charge of the main camp there at Kirjath Arba, died. So he hightails it back home as soon as word reaches him. Now here's a map of the area to give you an idea. After a period of mourning, Abraham made arrangements for Sarah's burial. Verse 3, then Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. Give me property for a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The permanent residents of Kirjath Arba were descendants of someone named Heth. This is a reference to the Hittites, a people who'd begun in Asia Minor, but then had spread really all over the Middle East. For years, critics of the Bible mocked it for the prominent place the Hittites have in the early books. Early archaeology had no evidence beyond the Bible for the existence of the Hittites, and so it was fashionable among scoffers to refer to the Hittites as a fatal flaw that marked the Bible as being unreliable. But then archaeologists discovered not just incidental evidence of a people called the Hittites. No, they found vast evidence of a sophisticated civilization from a unique culture based on some huge cities in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Colonies were found at a distance from the Hittite homeland, suggesting they were masters of trade and had made a concerted effort to expand their society beyond the borders of their own realm. So, careful scoffers, history makes clear that your pet arguments against the Bible, they have a funny habit of flipping to become reasons to trust it. Now, Kirjath Arba, where Abraham's extensive clan was now based, was one of those Hittite colonies. Because Abraham was a nomadic shepherd, he owned no land, but he needed some to bury his wife, and so he asked for a plot to bury her. He had a specific spot in mind. It was a cave that he'd found some time before. Verse 5. And the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, that you may bury your dead. So the locals invited Abraham to bury Sarah alongside their own dead. It's a polite offer. It's a way to establish some goodwill with who they recognize is a strategic ally. Remember, the local rulers were always on the lookout for alliances to bolster their presence in an area and forestall attack by, some ambitious upstart looking to expand his influence. Abraham knows what they're up to by this generous offer. But he's grieving the loss of his beloved, and he has no interest in using this moment for petty local politics. he has one thing in mind, and that's to provide a suitable burial place for Sarah. Still, he has to do the expected dance, lest he upset the locals. Verse 7. Then Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, that is, the sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and meet with Ephron the son of Zohar for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah which he has, which is at the end of his field. Let him give it to me at the full price as property for a burial place among you. Now, the cave that Abraham has in mind is in a field owned by Ephron, no relation to Zac Efron, the actor. He asks the Hittite leaders who've made the offer to mediate for him by asking Ephron to sell that cave. And they comply, so word is sent to Ephron of Abraham's offer. He arrives at the city gate where such business would be conducted. Verse 10. Now Ephron dwelt among the sons of Heth. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the presence of the sons of Heth, all who entered at the gate of the city, saying, No, my lord, hear me, I give you the field and the cave that's in it. I give it to you in the presence of the sons of my people. I give it to you. Bury your dead. Now, archaeologists have unearthed records detailing how these kinds of land deals went down. A buyer indicated his desire for a piece of land, and the owner then launched negotiations by saying something polite like, Oh, look, we're such good friends, you just take it. Now, that, of course, wasn't a sincere offer. It was a way of saying, okay, I'll sell it to you. But then they would begin the real negotiations and eventually settle on a price. But Abraham is in no mood to bargain, dither, negotiate. He's in grief. He just wants to honor Sarah by giving her a good burial, and so all of his house can properly mourn. Verse 12, Then Abraham bowed himself down before the people of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If you will give it, please hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? So bury your dead. Have you ever heard of EQ, emotional intelligence? Not long ago, the idea was floated that there are different kinds of intelligence. There's, of course, raw or classical intelligence, the measurement of a person's ability to adapt to their environment. But some contend that there's also different kinds of intelligence, like mechanical intelligence or emotional intelligence, which is sometimes called EQ. EQ is the measure of someone's ability to discern both their own emotional state and that of others, and then to respond appropriately. Now, what does it have to do with what we're reading here? Well, Ephron must have had a very low EQ, because he's not picking up on the signals that Abraham is sending. He's clueless to Abraham's grief. He tells Abraham that the land is worth 400 shekels, which is a grossly inflated price, because he assumes that Abraham is going to make a counteroffer. You know how this works. Ephron says the land is worth 400 shekels. In reality, it's probably worth about 300 shekels, but he says 400 because he expects Abraham to do the usual bargaining thing and offer 200. And then through back and forth haggling, they eventually arrive at 300 shekels. So what's Abraham's reply to Ephron's opening bid of 400 shekels? Verse 16, And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out the silver for Ephron, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, currency of the merchants. So instead of haggling, Abraham just hands over Ephron's opening bid, which he was no doubt delighted about until he followed up that delight with some reflection and realized that he ought to have been more circumspect and aware of Abraham's mood. The proper thing would have been for Ephron to just announce the real value of the plot. Oh well, no point in regret, especially now that your pocket's full of silver and you can buy that horse that you've been looking at. So take note here of the casual mention of shekels of silver, currency of the merchants. Though it's about 2000 BC, there's already a standardized medium of exchange, something that had been set by the marketplace. What's referred to here is likely not actual coins. Historians attribute the minting of coins to the 6th century BC king of Lydia, Croesus. That's a full 1400 years after Abraham. Now later, the shekel will be a coin, but at this date, it was a measure of weight, just shy of an ounce, 0.4 of an ounce to be exact. Now, of course, the value of precious metals like silver and gold varies over time. So what the value of 400 shekels was at that time, we have no idea. But in today's dollars, 400 shekels is 160 ounces of silver. So a little over $3,800. Now, since the price of land tends to rise over time, $3,800 in 2000 BC had to have been a lot of money. Verse 17. So the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, which were within all the surrounding borders, were deeded to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went in at the gate of the city. Now, verse 17 is a little confusing because we're unfamiliar with the area. Earlier, we had read that all of this took place at Kirjath Arba, later known as Hebron. Machpelah, with its cave that Abraham wanted to bury Sarah in, was near Kirjath Arba, not in it. It was actually located between there and the nearby town of Mamre, another place that Abraham had spent quite a bit of time in during his nomadic journeys. That's how he knew about the cave. He had spent a lot of time there. That Machpelah was deeded to Abraham, it says, before Kirjath's elders, in the gate of the city means that some kind of documentation was drawn up, which is another blow to the idea that writing was a much later development. Verse 19, and after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And so the field and the cave that is in it were deeded to Abraham by the sons of Heth as property for a burial place. Now, many years before, God gave this entire land to Abraham. He could have, by rights, simply taken the initial offer of the sons of Heth, saying, thanks, it's all mine anyway because God gave it to me. But he didn't do that. He observed the customs of the day and paid for the land. You see, Abraham has learned from his previous failures when he blew his witness before Pharaoh and Abimelech. He wants outsiders to regard God as good and great, and so he isn't haughty with them. He isn't arrogant and superior that God had chosen him, not them. Observe him with these Hittites. He's a powerful and rich man by their admission. But instead of sitting among them, playing that silly game of who's more prestigious, he bows, taking the posture of a servant rather than a lord. Both verses 7 and 12 say that Abraham stood and bowed to the Hittite elders. As a rich man, when he had arrived at the gate of the city to conduct business, a seat had been provided for him. But he stands now so that he might bow. You see, he's acting in genuine humility. His manner and words throughout this entire affair are filled with respect and a remarkable courtesy. I'm appalled by the rudeness that some Christians show unbelievers. They display a smug superiority that leaves a sour taste and a bad odor. The rudeness with which some treat service people, like counter workers and waitresses, it's inexcusable. Listen, if you're a Christian, don't leave the waitress or the waiter a tract but no tip. If she sees you praying over your meal, she'd better see some presidents' faces on the table when you leave. Some years ago, I knew a guy who trumpeted himself as a Christian business owner. He assumed that would secure some support from the church community, and indeed it did. But I talked to another business owner that the first guy had owed a lot of money to and never paid. If you claim to be a follower of Jesus, follow Abraham's example of humility, courtesy, and respect.